In this episode, we're going to be exploring a little bit of Egyptian mythology. And the central focus will be the path of ascension as presented and proposed by ancient Egyptian myth. Every culture throughout history has had a theory of the other worlds, right? A model, a concept for what some may call the afterlife or the higher world. The Egyptians certainly had one. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, every culture has had a concept of something that is beyond the material world, right? It is only during the last couple of hundred years, which is fairly recently, in comparison to our 3,000 year known history, that the idea that we're just neurons and chemicals and we really do not exist, and that our consciousness is just one dimensional. Like, that's a fairly recent new idea which came about at the Renaissance, after the period of the Middle Ages, where science came in and says, let's get rid of superstitious religion and become very rational minded and logical, which was good, because what that did was it saved us from Middle Age superstition. But at the same time, we threw out the baby with the bathwater. There were and still are very important teachings within these spiritual traditions that describe these other dimensions of consciousness, right? So every tradition has had them. That's very important to acknowledge. And the Egyptians certainly had one, right? So in this episode, we're going to be looking at some of these sort of Egyptian ideas of these, alternate states of consciousness, right? An interesting point in ancient Egyptian civilization is that religion and politics and culture were not separate. They were not three different separate sort of entities. They were all one. Politics, religion, culture, it was all one. It was all cohesive unit, right? Compared to today, where we have a separation between church and state, politics and religion, science and religion, right? It has separated, it has fragmented, you can say. Now, an interesting idea within myth is this idea of the gods. Like, what do we mean by the gods? Like, the gods is basically a conventional term which refers to the Egyptian heavenly beings, right? The gods are the spirits that are among the undying stars, as the Egyptians will say. These heavenly beings, right? Now, they're not creators, they're not creator beings, but they are powerful beings that human beings would relate to, right? So that's what you mean by the gods. And there's plenty of them, right? The Egyptian term for a god is Neter, right? And the plural term is Neteru. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's the Neter for God and Neteru for gods, which you can generally translate it as dwellers in the heavens, or the heavenly beings, right? Now, a neter, it can be defined as, one charged with power, right? Which suggests the meaning that, you become a god, right? And that is basically the path that we are in, is we are, on a path to becoming a god, to becoming God-like, right? And that requires a path. That requires some kind of a method or approach or philosophy that will get us there, right? So the term neter implies that it is a work to be done. this means that, we have to get to work, right? That there is work that needs to be done. And an analogy by, Paul in the New Testament is the analogy of completing the race, right? Which is, it gets the general idea going, but it's not entirely accurate because it's not a race, right? We're not in competition to see who gets to the end first, right? It could be seen more like a marathon. The spirit of a marathon is finishing it. It's like, can you actually, whether you finish first or you finish last, what's important is that you finished, right? That you got across the finish line. So whether you fly through it, whether you crawl through it, whatever it takes for you to get through that finish line, that's what's important. So with the work, the spiritual work, the path of ascension, it's not a race. It's not who gets there, or it's not how you get there. The point is that you get across the finish line, that sort of heavenly ascent. That's what's important, right? So you're not in competition with others, right? You're not trying to outrun others or outdo others, right? It's just you and the destination, right? So that's very important to acknowledge that, the work is basically, independent, right, from others, right? You're not in competition. The Buddhists, they say that there's only two things that you need to do. One is start the path, and two is to continue it, right? And to just simply focus on, walking the path, right? And not really worrying too much about the end. The end will eventually come. It will eventually come as long as we stay on the path. So that's really important. And you can say the same, within the Egyptian framework, that, as long as you sort of stay in that path, which is long, hard, and difficult. And as we all know, the most difficult, challenging aspect of anything is the beginning, is getting started, right? Once you get started, it gets easier along the way. But it's that first step, that sort of first chapter of the journey, that is the most challenging and the most difficult. And sometimes it could take, half a lifetime just to get started on the path, which unfortunately that is the case in our modern culture. This path requires psychological death and psychological rebirth, which in the Egyptian myth, that is what Horus represented. Horus represented the rebirth of Osiris. Osiris, dies and is resurrected as Horus, representing the higher being. You also see this in the Christian stories, where, for example, Saul becomes Paul. Saul was somebody who was, criticizing and condemning the Christians, right? But then along his journey through Damascus, he met the Lord and had this transformation and was illuminated, and then he became Paul, representing that now, he changed his ways. He no longer saw the world the way that he saw it before, and a new mission started in his life. So that's very common, where, somebody changes their name. You have your regular, ordinary name, and then as you become awakened and enlightened or initiated at a moderate degree, your name changes, right? You're not the same person you were before, and you don't live in the same world that you lived before, because a new world has opened. So this idea of the old self dying, the Egyptian Osiris, right, and then a new self being reborn, is common across every tradition. And the Eye of Horus is a very central theme in the Egyptian story, and you also see this eye in the dollar bill, the American dollar bill. The eye on top of the pyramid. It doesn't represent the Illuminati, right? The real Illuminati is sort of the Eye of Horus, the other side, right? The heavenly being. So that the Eye of Horus represents the eye of the heavenly beings. And that is the eye in which according to the Egyptian myth, we are to travel through. We have to go through the Eye of Horus in order to enter to the heavenly world. If that Eye of Horus is the portal, is the sort of the secret door, then that implies that there's got to be a way, there's got to be a path. And the Egyptians call it the Nile, right? There's this, which is analogous to like the Nile River, right? The Nile is the river that leads to the main waters, which they used to call the winding waterway or the winding way, and today we call the Milky Way, right? And this was the purpose of the temples in ancient Egypt, is to open this Nile River and for people to go through it in order to enter into the Milky Way, or what I call the winding waterway or the winding way, right? So this was the temples were and still are, a nexus point where heaven and earth meet, and this is where the initiations were conducted. And there's a really interesting analogy there of the way, with Christ, where he says, "I am the way," right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. Which we can interpret as, both Horus and Christ opened up this path towards the stars, towards heaven, towards the heavenly beings, right? So it's very common in Egyptian myth and the Christian story. So now the final theme is fire, which fire is it's a theme in every spiritual culture. And as we briefly mentioned, the Eye of Horus can be seen as as hot as a furnace, which means that we have to walk through it. We have to become immune to the fire, and what burns away is our shadows, our nasty parts that have to get released. And, by walking through the fire, we are able to ascend to the higher mysteries. So in conclusion, in this episode, we just briefly, explore the ancient Egyptian ascension path, towards the stars, which is very interesting. It has captivated many, many audiences. And, as always, all you have to do is seek, seek and you shall find. If you want to learn more, you can go on Amazon and just start exploring. But if you want some recommendations, here are 2 recommendations. The first one is the occult classic, the book, The Kybalion. It's short and sweet. And I think just recently they released the centennial edition. It's been over 100 years since this book came out, and it is an occult classic. And I think that's really a good one to start with. The Kybalion is the first entry point into the Egyptian mystery. So I definitely recommend that one. Now, if you want something a bit more scholarly, something more that explores and goes deeper into the whole Egyptian narrative, I recommend the book by one of my favorite esoteric philosophers, Gary Lachman, and it's called The Quest for Hermes Trismegistus, From Ancient Egypt to the Modern World. Now, I must admit that I have not read the book. However, I am familiar with the author. I read all his blogs, and I really like his writing. So I consider him a authentic, reliable source of esoteric knowledge. So I definitely recommend all his books, but this one in particularly is one that he goes into detail, as he does with all his writings, or at least the ones that I have come across. So these 2 books, The Kybalion and the quest for Hermes Trismegistus are two good entry points into these mysteries. So those are the two that I recommend. Now, as always, I recommend Meditations on the Tarot. The author tried to combine both Hermeticism, the Hermes myth, with Christianity. And this is the reason that he gave the term Christian Hermeticism, trying to combine, Hermes and Christ, into one. So Meditations on the Tarot is definitely another source that we can go in and explore. So those three books should give us plenty to work with. So hopefully this episode was illuminating and interesting, and hopefully it opens up our imagination to continue the exploration into these mysteries, whether they may be through the Egyptian myth, through the Christian stories, through Jungian depth psychology, or through any other mystery school. As the Buddhists say, all you have to do is start and continue. That's all we got to do, and not worry too much about the end. Right? The end of the journey will eventually come.